So here's going to be a spoiler review of the Stranger Things Season 5 finale, the finale for the whole series. I had a spoiler-free review that went up where I talked about things in a non-spoiler surface level kind of format, as I do for most of my normal reviews. But here in this spoiler review, I'm going to be getting into the deep ins and outs about the particulars of the finale, stuff that happened, stuff I liked, stuff I didn't like. But needless to say, I'm going to be talking about things in a deep spoiler context. So obviously, if you have not seen the finale, you shouldn't be watching this review. I haven't done a spoiler review in this format since Avengers Endgame over 6 years ago now. So it was a special occasion for Stranger Things Season 5. Speaking of Avengers Endgame, that's the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to the spoiler review. I actually went to the in-theater experience you could do for the Stranger Things Season 5 finale. Netflix, they allowed the finale to be playing in theaters for just a couple of days, I believe, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. So that was a chance to see it on the big screen, and that was something I absolutely just could not miss out on. You know, it's good that the episode was 2 hours long, so you could justify watching it as it kind of basically was a movie, kind of like the Season 4 finale. But just the opportunity, a big part of a big mega event, talked about in my normal review for the finale. I live for these kind of events where it is a packed auditorium and there's that anticipation for like a big movie in terms of how the story's going to play out and what's going to be the fate of the characters. In recent years, you know, Marvel movies have kind of dominated those kind of events. When it comes to the trio of Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man No Way Home, Deadpool and Wolverine, where just your mind is just buzzing and that anticipation is just all the way filled. And Stranger Things was on that kind of level. You know, it's been that level of series for the last decade, even though I didn't start watching it until a few years later after it started in 2019. But I was glad I was able to start watching and get hooked. And watching the Season 5 finale, the finale of the whole series, on the big screen warranted it. Now, I do think it was kind of an obnoxious thing still to release it on New Year's Eve. There's a whole lot of shenanigans to do on New Year's Eve and to kind of force people to watch the episode. I was like, really? But I'll give it credit. It made it feel like a big mega event. And I actually was not shocked by the amount of people in the auditorium. One, I saw how fast tickets were getting gobbled up. I haven't seen tickets get gobbled up this quick since Avengers Endgame, probably even more so. Just because if you wanted to watch this on the big screen, it was a very limited opportunity. I ended up going to a 6 o'clock showing. I did that because I wanted to have some time to have my New Year's shenanigans afterwards, which I was able to, thankfully. But I was very surprised that coming out of it, even at 9 o'clock? There was still a packed lobby and people heading in to watch the various screenings, which, you know, those screenings would have been ending close to 11:30. So, and even some of them, you know, if you go to a screening at like 9:30 or 10, you're spending New Year's Day, the countdown watching Stranger Things. But it really did make it feel like an event. It was definitely special to be there with a bunch of fans. That's the thing with Stranger Things, because it's a Netflix series, you don't have the opportunity to watch it with other people, other fans, you know, that kind of event type atmosphere. That's what you get from those big mega Marvel movie experiences I was talking about, that anticipation with other people. And, you know, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, as Stranger Things has never done the thing where you're able to watch this in the theaters. So it was really cool they did it. I'm wondering if they thought about doing it for Season 4, that finale. That would have been pretty cool as well. But regardless, it was definitely very cool to have the opportunity to watch this on the big screen. After 20 minutes of trailers, the finale kicked off. And yeah, it was that kind of crowd where you could tell they were big time hyped. Everyone just waiting, just wanting to see what was going to happen naturally. All the fans in there, of course, you had the girls that were, and this was the first spoiler I'll get into, all the girls in the auditorium, when the titles were coming up, I heard a lot of girls shouting, "Oh, please save Steve." And I was like, oh, Jesus, because I didn't want to hear no spoilers. And the thing is, I did not watch any trailers for Season 5, and I certainly did not watch any trailer for the finale. That would have been insane to watch. So, but I think I had heard rumblings over the previous days after Volume 2 was done that I guess people were afraid that Steve was gonna die. I guess one of my friends at work told me there was something where the Duffer Brothers kind of teased that scenario, and I guess that's what had everyone worried. But I'll get more into that when that actual scene, when I actually get into that. I'm going to try to go into things chronologically as they played out. But yeah, the finale was coming up, starting to set things up. I had very much been enjoying season 5. I thought it had, lots of good points. Things are enjoyable. Its scale and story was appropriate for a series that had gotten as big and massive as Stranger Things had. And most importantly, I was really enjoying all the character stuff, seeing those dynamics, character arcs, come to a natural conclusion and getting some closure at it. And we better get closure because this was the end of the series. And so with the end of Volume 2, setting up the big plan to save the day, kind of a silly, well, I don't want to say silly plan, but it's one of those Stranger Things out there kind of plans. But hey, that was the mission, to go to the world above the Upside Down, called the Abyss, to defeat Vecna, Henry, save the children, save Holly, and save the world. So naturally, myself and everyone else was hyped to see what the finale was going to hold in store. So what was cool is that, seeing the actual plan come together, the whole thing where they lived up to what Steve said, using that slinky, using the needle tower to go all the way up to the sky, which shows that needle tower did play a very important role, like how it actually was featured in the poster. I love how these Stranger Things posters, awesome posters, have a way of sort of signaling, being teasers in terms of what's going to be the real important elements in the series. And that whole radio squawk tower ended up being an important element, taking them to the sky, leading them to the whole of the sky going up, because I don't know if it was the abyss that was crashing down on the normal world, I guess is what was really happening. But anyway, that's where it got into the first big kind of uh-oh moment, where things are kind of going haywire in terms of going up into the abyss, where it's not, the needle isn't going through the actual crack, and it was going to kind of shatter on the rocks. And when Steve was about to, holding on for dear life, and then he fell off, I just heard every lady in that auditorium, just like, and everyone was very kind of disturbed because, Steve's a big fan favorite. And I'll say this, not just the ladies, Steve had become my favorite character after the pretty boy douchebag he was in season 1. I thought he had unbelievable character development as far as becoming that kind of a great, just kind of a great down-to-earth guy and babysitter to Dustin and the other kids, and then how his relationship with Robin, he's just a cool guy. So I didn't want to see him die either. And I guess when it got to that edge scene, because I could hear gasps from everyone in the audience, is like, oh, is this going to be it? Lo and behold, you having Jonathan come to save him. Now that was really cool. That was something I did not see coming. Thankfully, nothing was spoiled for me going into this, but that was a really cool moment to see those Jonathan come in clutch, save Steve. Kind of owed him after Steve kind of saved Nancy and Jonathan from the melting glue room. Still not exactly sure what that was all about, but that was really cool. And what was even nicer was a great character moment for Steve and Jonathan. Kind of the final closure on the whole love triangle thing with Nancy. I was kind of shocked in the previous episode what became of Jonathan and Nancy's relationship, where I guess the dialogue made it a little unclear, but how they broke up, realizing that I guess, their relationship, it wasn't meant to be as far as, a whole lovey-dovey kind of thing. And you could feel things moving in that direction. What was teased in season 4 and then season 5, it was all like pre that whole trapped in that melting glue room. There wasn't anything shown that made you think, these two are, really in all that good of a place when it comes to their relationship. They really didn't have any scenes like they did in the previous seasons 1, 2, and 3, where you really felt something. So it kind of lived up to what season 4 teased, where things weren't all that great with their relationship. So it confirmed that scene between Steve and Jonathan was the one that actually confirmed to me, made it clear that Jonathan had to let a girl go. But then those two just kind of talking it out, realizing that they've had their differences. I guess the end of the world does kind of bring people together. But that was really cool that they were able to become, friends and, kind of chummy. Obviously with the playful dialogue saying, hey, I still don't like you. But it was cool that after all the tension those characters had in season one, and they never really had any kind of interactions after, but you knew stuff was lingering when it came to that love triangle with Nancy. It was nice that things resolved that way. Now, I was beyond shocked, though, if you told me that whole love triangle was going to end that way, in terms of both guys just kind of giving up on the girl and everyone being happy about it, even, Nancy, who didn't seem like I said, things weren't really working out with either of those dudes when you hear her dialogue in that melting glue room. But what was cool is that it was a resolution that I didn't see coming, but you could get behind it because, all the characters ended up in a good place, as we got to see in the very ending scene. All of them ended up in a natural good place, where the only one that had a legit inner relationship was Robin. But I'll get into that scene later. But yeah, that was the first of the nice character moments between Steve and Jonathan. It was a real crowd cheering moment too, when Jonathan actually saved Steve. That was some big applause right there. That was the second biggest cheer moment when that happened. People were very happy not to see Steve die, but it was kind of a very rewarding character moment to see Jonathan, after, the stuff that happened with Steve, save the guy. So that was a great cheering moment, and that was the big reason to see this in the auditorium with a bunch of fans, is that you just got to have those kind of emotions for everyone. It would have been fine from the whole crowd. It would have been fine watching the episode at home. Hell, I love the season 4 finale, and that wasn't in theaters. I didn't watch that with a crowd or anything. But watching this with a crowd really elevated the experience as far as those crowd cheering moments. The best one, the loudest one, was when Derek told Vecna to suck his fat one, holding up the middle finger. Oh, that got big cheers right there. And just other moments here and there where the bad guys, the military guys, were getting those comeuppance. The last minute save from Murray when he threw the grenade onto the helicopter, 11 snapping all of those fools' necks. Just lots of really great moments like that. And these were legit cheers. This wasn't no fake, a Minecraft movie clap and cheer at everything kind of cheers. Those kind of experiences can be pretty annoying because it's a lot of non-genuine type emotions and just clapping for the sake of clapping. But this one really warranted it, the stuff that was happening here for what the series had been building up, because it really earned all of these moments, these crowd cheering, pleasing moments, and other, great character moments. The stuff between Eleven and Hopper, that dialogue was great. Obviously I expected these kind of scenes because of the whole doomsday scenario. Those two have a very kind of loving relationship. Hopper, in the position he's in after his own daughter passed away and treating Eleven as his own daughter, the relationship those two have had. That dialogue was very nice, very touching. When it gets to the part, Eleven's, final bit of dialogue with Hopper, when she tells him, I'm not Sarah. That was a moment like, damn, whoa. But not in a kind of disrespectful way, just in a way it was like, oh, this character's really growing up and telling Hopper things are going to be okay, even though I'm going to get to that choice. That happened towards, I don't know, I guess it was a little bit before the official midway section of the episode. The episode definitely had some pretty interesting pacing. But when the mission actually got started, like I said, at the top with that whole needle stuff, when it's going up to the sky, it was cool seeing the plan, come about in terms of going up to the abyss. 11, what's his name? I can't remember. What was her actual number 8? 11's sister, Max, going into Vecna's mind layer, getting the kids, the tricks they were playing with 8 using her powers, that kind of stuff. It was very well done. What really elevated the whole scenario, I forgot, I was trying to remember, there was one other character moment, I was like, I'm forgetting something. The moment with Mike and Will, I'm glad those two had a moment to acknowledge Will's reveal at the end of episode 7. That whole storyline with Will and the eyes he was giving Mike in season 4, I was very surprised they went in that direction. I guess they just needed Will to have something to do, but I think they did make that Will's whole reveal It's nice that it wasn't just some cheap thrown in story, which it kind of felt like in season 4, to be honest. They made it an integral part of the story this time around, not in a shove it in your face kind of way, but in a natural way that made sense for the character based on what we had seen. And then it had those rewarding moments where you kind of used Robin's dialogue to go into full sorcerer mode at the end of volume 1. That scene was really good. And then the actual reveal that he has at the end of volume 2, episode 7. I never expected the reveal to happen like that, just basically telling everyone at the front like that. But that whole scene was really well done. Was wondering, would they actually really go into any kind of real kind of reveal for it? Or at least addressing it fully, Will and Mike head on. I'm glad they did, and that was another very touching scene. That was the thing this episode had to do was, being that this was the end point, you really have to go in and address these relationships and things on a satisfactory note and just not leave any loose ends. They left some loose ends, but thankfully not with the main character stuff we would have wanted to see. So that was really nice. Now, getting back into the plan I was talking about, again, it was really cool to see that whole plan take place, going up to the sky, the whole thing of going into Vecna's house, freeing the kids, or trying to free the kids anyway, with Max, 11, and 8. The whole trick that 8 played on Vecna, that was really nice. And then finally seeing 11 and Vecna, come together, the confrontation. We really needed to see. It was kind of, I guess, somewhat surprising. We hadn't seen those two interact in the previous episodes, but whatever, in terms of season 5, but better late than never. But man, did I feel the tension big time when it got to the scene where Vecna is playing the mind tricks on Hopper. That's kind of what I teased in the review, my spoiler-free review, where I'm saying that's where this whole mission really elevated for me, was when things go big time sideways. When he's playing the mind tricks on Hopper and he shoots he was shooting, he hits the tank, at least he thinks it does, and then when you see that blood from 11, oh my God, that got me big time. Everyone in the auditorium thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? Now, the first tip that it wasn't really a real thing that was happening there was the fact that 11 in the actual mind dream world or whatever, still seemed perfectly fine. I guess, no one's an expert on how this whole dream mind scenario works. So that was kind of the first clue that it wasn't actually a real scenario. And then when you saw that she was fine, she had no bullets in her, it was like, oh man. But what really elevated all this is that, Vecna is a handful enough to deal with, but them military guys, man, this series knows how to write asshole human characters who you absolutely hate, and those military guys were something else. Major or General K, played by Linda Hamilton, hated her. That other guy, Akers, Colonel Akers, whatever his name is, with the kind of weird half of his head. I can't remember how he got those injuries in the previous episode, but his demeanor, you're just like, man, I hate this guy too. So they didn't make it hard to root against those military assholes. And that's why you really feel something when the tide started to turn on 11, Hopper, and 8. Probably the moment where I was like, oh my goodness, was when they're using that kryptonite sonic device and Hopper uses it as the opportunity to get 11 out of there, and then he leaves 8 behind. And everyone in the auditorium, me myself, I'm like, damn, that's really effed up right there, how he just left her. And I thought he was gonna leave her, especially after he probably remembered how she pulled the gun on him when they were trying to decide, when he was confronting 11 about her whole suicide sacrifice plan her and 8 were gonna go with. But that was nice that he went back from her. I'm not sure if that was his original plan to start with, but regardless, made for a nice moment. And again, it was very satisfying to see them bad guys get their butts whooped. Very cool that Murray had the save for all of them, throwing the grenade at the helicopter, allowing 11 to save all of them. Of course, it was the first somber moment when 8 actually dies. Nice moment between her and 11. I think it was the first real major death of season 5. The series just really doesn't have the balls to kill off characters from what I've seen. When I saw that they couldn't even kill off Mrs. Wheeler after the Demogorgon basically slashed the hell out of her neck. Once she wasn't dead, I was like, man, this series just... And then between, Max surviving at the end of season 4, I'm all like, yeah, they ain't killing nobody in this series. Except if you're someone who's not part of the main group, which I would say 8 kind of qualifies. She's definitely not in the same billing as any of the characters that you see on like the actual poster for season 4. So, you do have to kill off characters to make the stakes feel elevated. Otherwise, you just have too many characters. And to be honest, season 5 had kind of finally gotten into that zone where they did have almost too many characters. I did think that thankfully everyone got a nice moment to shine, whether it was the group in the Abyss, the team in the Upside Down doing their thing, 11, Hopper, 8, Murray. Again, that was a really cool save by him. The one character that's just the biggest what the hell in volume 2, and especially this episode, is what they did with Erica. I talked about that in the spoiler-free review, but man, I'm not saying she deserves the same kind of billing as the core 4 boys or 11, but what they did with the character was just embarrassing here. She had a moment where she's in the church tower, from the previous episode, where they're part of the plan to get the group actually into the military base by unlocking the signal doors. That was fine, but then you think like, when the actual military group, finds that church-based tower and goes in there. What was interesting, it was never shown, it showed Erica and that school teacher. It was cool that we tagged along for a little bit. It showed them seeing the military guys and leaving, but I was like, was there a scene missing? Because they never showed. I was under the assumption, I guess they never showed those guys getting captured. I was expecting those guys to be part of the captured group with Max and Vicky, and I don't think I ever saw them in that final part after the group comes back from the Upside Down, unless I'm missing it. I've only seen the episode once so far, but I don't remember. Regardless, though, the only other time you see Erica was at the very end, the graduation, where I think she had the confetti machine. That was pretty embarrassing what was done with the character there. After, pretty good role in season 3 and 4, and she's on the frickin' poster, for crying out loud. So I don't think that was very well done, what was done with her. Pretty embarrassing if you ask me, but at a certain point, I guess you just have too many characters and you gotta make sacrifices somewhere, but it just sucks it had to happen with her. But getting into, more stuff that's going on, it's a lot to juggle for the series, I get it. The actual stuff that was going on in the Abyss, that, I gotta say, the Abyss visually was pretty ugly. That whole piss color, yellow canyon and cloud type look. The Upside Down looked way cooler and cinematic, whether it was the times you had that kind of darkened kind of look, or the various times where you had the red aesthetic. I guess that would have been in Vecna's, actual layer that you saw in season 4, that kind of rocky sky place, wherever that was. The actual Abyss didn't quite do it for me, but I guess it is what it is. It just didn't really look the best on the big screen. I guess that was an interesting twist. The actual, whatever that you thought it was, that kind of weird Spider Canyon rock structure thing that turned out to be the Mind Flayer. Didn't see that coming. I thought that the Mind Flayer was kind of cool when it had that in the previous season 2, I guess, that weird cloudy spider type form, but now it's just a more bigger, more spider-like version of that slimy red thing it turned into when it was in the mall of season 3. That was an interesting twist. I didn't really expect to see that as a physical manifestation again. But bringing back the Mind Flayers when in this final episode was where this series legit almost got ruined. Because when it got to the part where Will was psychologically, talking to Vecna using those powers, and I guess the reveal that the Mind Flayer was the one, I guess, manipulating Henry through that stone thing in the suitcase. That was not very well explained, but whatever. We got the gist of it, that the Mind Flayer was behind everything. When it got to saying that, the Mind Flayer was the real villain here, first of all, I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, you just set up Vecna Henry to be the main bad guy, and now you're saying no, it was actually someone else all along. Now, to me, that can be just bad writing. It's really tough to pull that off. I mean, I didn't even love it when they did it in Star Wars, where you're watching the original movies and you think, oh, it's Darth Vader's the big bad, but it's like, no, there's actually someone above him. I mean, whatever. I mean, obviously Star Wars managed to do okay with it. I think what they were doing here would have been just bad writing in terms of what was set up in season 4 and now season 5. But my God, when it got to the part where Will was telling Vecna, you don't have to do this, you can change, you can fight for the good. He's manipulated you. I was like, man, don't y'all dare go down in this scenario. This guy's done way too much effed up stuff to try to pull and be some kind of hero. And that would have just legit made almost everything we had been watching previously just ruined, to be honest. This would have been a terrible creative decision, and there's a chance it might have gone that way. I'm thankful that cooler heads prevailed and they did not go in that direction, and Vecna said, hey, whatever happened, hey, I'm embracing this. I'm liking it. So I was like, okay, thank goodness, because I'm like, this guy doesn't deserve any kind of redemption. Leading to what became the final battle, that confrontation in the cave, 11 going one-on-one with Vecna, having a telekinetic, power off or whatever. The more badass moment was Nancy just going guns blazing to the mind flare, kind of drawing it out as bait and then just going full Rambo commando mode on it. I thought that was a nice touching moment where Jonathan, looked concerned for her even though he said he had let her go. That was a nice moment right there. But Nancy just going full on guns blazing when the thing was right there by the head. But it was cool, all the characters coming together to, defeat the thing, whether it was Lucas bringing back the throwback with the slingshot, Mike using the flare Nancy gave him, and you also had the other stuff cool, Dustin and Steve, fighting together using the spears that Eddie and Dustin used in season 4 to poke out that. I think that was where those little bat things were coming. That was cool. So that was cool that everyone was teaming up to do that. Something, a complaint I've heard is that during this whole battle in the Abyss, why Vecna did not call the Demogorgons, Demodogs, those bat things. And it is something that you think you have that thought and you're like, wait a minute, where was all this? The only thing I can think of is that those beings exist in the upside down, and this is the abyss, that layer that's above. So that would be why those things aren't there. I can get behind that. Plus, I mean, at a certain point, what are you going to do with this battle? I don't need it to be some giant, open field medieval type battle. That's not really what's important. And there is an explanation for why those guys aren't there. And I wasn't really thinking about that while watching the episode, but thankfully it's not like it's just a giant plot hole or anything. Plus we had plenty of Demogorgon action in Volume 1. Demodogs had the bats in Season 4. That was fine. Having that giant mind flare thing was fine enough. But yeah, the whole battle coming together and actually beating Vecna physically, finally, I was like, thank God, because I had my run of this fool right here. I thought what was really cool after freeing all the kids is that he wasn't completely dead yet. He was still had a pulse. I never would have expected, and for thinking about who would actually defeat Vecna, whether it would have been 11, Max, Will, I never would have had Joyce on that list. But poetically it made sense. Something that was nice during that final battle was the callbacks they did to all the, harm and torment Vecna's caused on everyone in the series in various forms, in terms of personal torture to those people themselves, the loved ones around them, those flashbacks, those cuts to Barbara, Bob, who else was there? Eddie. That was great to really let you know why Vecna. It's good they didn't go this redemption route with Vecna, because the guy just absolutely wrecked everyone's you-know-what throughout the whole series. And Joyce telling Joyce telling Vecna, you fucked with the wrong family. That was a great moment. And it was Joyce's determination to find Will, which is how, everyone discovered all of this upside down, this whole world, and leading to an unbelievable, 5 seasons of adventures, and more importantly, a whole lot of money for Netflix. So that was a real cool callback and a nice touch having Joyce deliver the final blow. So, I thought it was mostly satisfactory, the actual battle. I was thrown off by the whole Mind Flayer thing in terms of making that the real big bad, the one that was really behind all this. Again, I think the thing that at least saved it was that Vecna was still, a bad guy, and then still he's the one that still put into plan all of this stuff to F with everyone's lives and his ultimate plan to doom the world. I did think that this finale did take him down a notch as a villain. I think season 4 was just kind of picture perfect all throughout. Season 5 was going in a good direction too. I think the actual finale it wasn't perfect in terms of how he was handled, mainly because of that Mind Flayer twist. I was still happy to see him get defeated, and also it still wasn't completely clear everything in terms of those flashbacks that went to him, in terms of the kid. Like, what was he doing in the first place looking for that guy? Like, that still had no explanation whatsoever. So a lot of that stuff, unfortunately, still doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But regardless of all that, again, mostly satisfactory battle. But the thing that was in the back of my head, and the reason why I don't think everyone in the auditorium felt this and wasn't celebrating or relieved, was because you knew the military guys were still out there. They set that thing up where they were able to find the base of the Hawkins gang operation in the Squawk Tower, and having Max and Vicky captured, and then seeing the plans to, go to the Upside Down and all that stuff. So knowing that the military guys are out there and it's not over, and the whole military guys are the big reason why 11 and 8 were talking about, hey, this ain't gonna really be over until we're out of the picture, because they want to create more Henrys, and then who knows what's going to happen after that. So that was actually a cool setup, as far as knowing that, even though Vecna's defeated, the military guys are the ones that are really still causing a lot of harm out there. So you get to that part where they're coming out of the Upside Down. First of all, I don't know why all of those guys were surprised. Like, they knew, the military flat out saw all of those guys go in, truck charging into the Upside Down world. So you had to think or know that they were going to be making some kind of pursuit, whether they actually go into the Upside Down or if they were waiting for them. Turns out it was the latter. They were waiting for them, at least Agent K and those guys. And so leading to that whole scenario where, they take everyone out, and it's like, or not take them out, but have them pinned down. And you're like, oh, bro, well, how's this going to end? And you're thinking, like, this has to be, like, this is going to be a moment right here, as far as 11 kind of living up to what she talked about. And when she was just standing over there, I was like, oh boy, this is it. This is the Tony Stark sacrifice moment. That scene of dialogue, of that mind connection between 11 and Mike, that was a really nice scene. It was very, very touching. The emotions you saw from both characters. Unfortunately, they just never really got to, sad that they never really got to have their true happy ending. And 11 trying to tell Mike, I've got to do this. I want you to understand. The song choice, man, that was unexpected, going with Purple Rain. I know Purple Rain has the tones of a kind of a somber thing, but it's still a little bit more, I don't know, energetic, if you want to put it. It was an interesting song choice, but one that worked, and one that's, I think it's going to make that song even more iconic than it even is, to be honest. I mean, if you go on social media, a lot of the stories of my friends who are, talking about the episode in kind of non-spoilers fashion, and just having that Purple Rain music over their thoughts, saying, man, I'm still shaken thinking about this. You realize that that song, hey, it might have been a weird, unexpected choice, but I think it did work. And it actually was kind of, having that song, I think it did elevate the scene with the actual, sacrifice happening, the actual scene of the upside down collapsing on top of 11 was powerful stuff. It was good. I think, for this being the ending, it's like, man, I'm not saying you have to kill off characters to be a real kind of ending, but it definitely does add to the emotions in terms of what you're feeling in the moment. Making it feel like this is the end. With Avengers Endgame, I don't think you could have gotten away with that movie, this big saga, and it's like happily ever after for everyone. You gotta have real sacrifices to really elevate the emotions. It's not something you do it in not such like a cheap gimmick kind of way. This certainly was that in terms of, your main franchise character in 11, the one that's the centerpiece of all the posters and is the real main protagonist when you look at the seasons in their entirety. So it was a worthwhile moment, and emotions from all the characters was great. The performances from everyone in the whole series and these scenes, these somber scenes, was amazing. When the scene was over and it cut to black, I heard a lot of sniffles, them ugly face tear faces in that auditorium. It was definitely people feeling the emotions, being riled up and hyped. But again, when you go into these kind of big end of a series scenarios, that there's that potential for, these kind of things to happen. And you're hoping against hope that doesn't, a lot of fans, because you do love these characters. But I think it's something that was needed to really make you feel those emotions. So that whole stuff happens, and then you're like, oh man, what's gonna happen next? Cue cutting to 18 months later. I was like, okay, fine. And then, that's where that's when this episode, I remember when after this whole military scene happened, I was thinking, this is a 2-hour episode. This is supposed to be a 2-hour episode, right? Because it feels like it's only been a little over an hour that's passed. And then you realize, no, that's not the actual ending. There's an extended kind of ending section that's at least like 40-ish minutes, where you get a bunch of different scenes that could have been the ending on their own. I talked about this in the spoiler review. Return of the King kind of started this, where these big type finales for a series, they have like 12 different endings of just kind of stacked on top of each other. It almost feels ridiculous. But the scenes themselves are actually, they're actually really good. Whether it was Hopper talking to Mike, giving him that pep talk, saying, hey, you know what? Things are going to be okay. We're all going to, not move on, but move forward together. The graduation scene of all of them graduating, that was cool. Now, something that I saw online that was very, very true was, all of those guys were graduating, the core 4 boys and Max. The big question is that, how the hell did Max graduate when she had been in a coma for 2 years? I guess that's where the 18 months later kicks in, but it's still pretty unrealistic, at least on the surface level, but whatever. She graduated. It was cool. And then Dustin's speech and that. I thought this whole scene was a big opportunity to have a bunch of characters from the series come in there. Like, I wanted to see Argyle in the Surfer Boy Pizza dude from season 4. That would have been really cool to have him in the crowd, on the benches with those guys. That would have been nice. Just other characters, like the fact that Hopper became chief of police again. I was like, well, what happened to those other guys who were his kind of deputy officers? I don't know if that's the right term. Those guys weren't in season 5 at all. And we had the one guy, the black guy, he had become the actual chief of police, while Hopper, everyone thought he was dead in season 4. That would have been cool to see those guys again. The biggest character missed opportunity, and the biggest what the hell, was after Dustin's graduation ceremony, or his speech, and everyone riled up and all that. They bring back Stacy, the girl he asked out in that that ball scene, school dance scene in season 2. It was a great scene in there. That whole scene. But she turned him down in season 2, but now she kind of got the feels for him in at the end, having her come back for season 5. But and you heard this in the auditorium when she was flirting with Dustin and Dustin was kind of into it. Everyone, myself, I was saying, what the hell happened with Susie? You know, Susie, you know, his girlfriend that we're introduced to in season 3, and she had an appearance in season 4 where she was helping out the Surfer Boy Pizza Group, their mission to find Eleven. You know, I was wondering, you know, this character, you know, had an important, not saying huge, but important role to play in season 3 and 4, and everyone really liked that character. I was wondering, are they going to address that in season 5? And based on the way Dustin was reacting to Stacy, I guess maybe they broke up or something. It's unfortunate because that was a really likable character. It would have been nice to have seen something else from her. I don't know if there was some kind of dialogue from in season 5 that said Dustin and Susie were broken up. I probably should have looked that up before I did this review. But that was disappointing not to see her again. Again, that was a great opportunity to have all the characters in a scene, you know, Avengers Endgame style, with like what you had with Tony Stark's funeral. That would have been really nice. Unfortunately, they didn't go that route. All the other ending scenes were really good to get closure from all the characters, subplots, things like that. Before I get into that, though, the biggest what the hell that this season finale did in terms of messing up closure was the end of that whole military storyline. So you had the thing where Eleven makes a sacrifice and the military guys are there. They've had that whole Hawkins group pinned down. But then you cut to 18 months later and you don't get any explanation for what happened to those guys afterwards. What happened to General K, those other guys? What happened to, like, what was that? What happened right after that whole scenario? You know, did Agent K just say, all right, y'all free to go now? Like, that would have been insane because that Hawkins group, I get the military was doing some shady stuff, but they killed military officers. You know, that was a big time, you know, ain't gonna forget this struggle kind of battle between the military and the Hawkins group. And that's just insane just to not address what happened to that character at all. I think Agent K was, you know, she was a good antagonistic force, but you can't just end things like that. To me, that was just beyond lazy, and that was easily the worst writing in season 5. It was one of the first things I was thinking about coming out of the episode or out of the theater auditorium, because it was just so glaring how they messed up on that. That was the biggest F up when it came to wrap ups. And there was other stuff too when you look back at it, like what happened to Paul Reiser's character. He was never seen again. Was he killed from season 4 after the military guys got him? So that whole military pursuit, it ended up being a good antagonistic force for the characters to deal with in season 4 and season 5. But the wrap up on that was beyond horrific. Easily the worst writing for season 5. But thankfully, what made up for this glaring omission was the beautiful wrap-up scenes for everything else was really, really good. Hopper asking Joyce to marry him, that's something that I hadn't thought of. I didn't think they were a couple. I was like, oh yeah, that would be a nice wrap-up for those characters, and them having dinner at Enzo's, like what was teased in season 3. That was great. A very touching scene between the group of young adults with Nancy, Jonathan, Steve, and Robin. Those 4 just, you know, looking, commenting on the state everyone is in their life. Nancy making who would have thought she would have dropped out of college? But, you know, it's kind of touching and seeing Jonathan's reaction. It was cool that those guys ended up in a good place, even though you had that tense love triangle with those 3. It ended up being really nice seeing Robin's reactions, you know, her crying, Maya Hawke, she was just so damn good. Those reactions from her were great, just genuine emotions. We're like, man, I just love these characters. You know, they just made such a nice friendship and just ending for all those guys. To where when I see that fan art, when it shows all of them as the Scooby Doo gang with what's his name, Robin as Velma. You have Steve as Fred. It was Nancy as Daphne, and then Jonathan as Shaggy. I'm like, hell, make that movie, because I love these characters and I love those actors. Those actors were just so good in that scene. So that was a nice wrap up right there. Like I said before, I never expect that whole love triangle to end that way, but it ended in a way where all the characters felt good about it. So you as an audience and fans could feel good about it too. The most poetic scene though was the actual finale scene, where it all goes back to those core four boys, Mike, Lucas, Dustin, and Will, and then you have the addition of Max playing Dungeons and Dragons after the big graduation. First of all, watching that whole, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons, watching that whole scene take place, I was like, oh boy, these kind of games just aren't for me. Obviously, the bigger purpose of it was just kind of doing a nice tie back to the first scene of all of those characters, at least the core four boys in season 1. That was very poetic to have their ending scene, them playing Dungeons and Dragons, but then going deeper in terms of, what happened, just kind of in a poetic way, Mike, the storyteller, kind of, telling the fates of the actual characters themselves. Max and Lucas continuing, their lovey relationship together, and I don't know if he said they were going to get married, but it was something implied that, they're together, and Lucas and Max, that ended up being a very touching relationship right there. Will doing his thing, finding acceptance, finding someone for him, more importantly. It was a nice ending for that character. Dustin being a super genius, going to doing his study work at college, and then the nice scene, him and Steve, reuniting. That was that dialogue, those two of, saying, Steve telling Dustin, you're my best friend, and seeing after everything those characters had been doing together since Steve became the mega babysitter in season 2. That was great stuff there. Mike just continuing to, I guess he became some kind of big time writer doing his thing. But then when it got to explaining the thing for 11, that's where I was like, yeah, I knew this series didn't have the balls to really, really kill off characters. Or do they? Because the way it's explained is Mike, saying almost in a way what he thinks happened, what believed happened. I mean, there's no way, it'd be hard to know when 11 would have told Mike all this plan about 8 and all that. I mean, who knows? Maybe it just wasn't shown on screen. But regardless, the way it's done and showing 11 living the dream she talked about, going somewhere far off and with 3 waterfalls, that was, and could potentially be an interesting ending for that character. Poetic in terms of, her finding her own place in the world and finding freedom and peace. But the thing is, or did she? Because that's something that was nice about the ending. I was telling that ending for 11 and saying, the character saying, I believe, and kind of tears almost in a wishful kind of way, is that's nice, because that's a kind of nice mystique ending right there, where you have to ask yourself, it could go either way. Either she actually did sacrifice herself in the whole upside down collapsing scenario, or it was a thing where this actually was the ending for her, because with the way the situation played out, with how Mike said, it was something that would make sense. But what's cool about that is that I was talking to friends afterwards, it reminded me of that ending for The Dark Knight Rises, where you kind of see or think what you want to think, and that's actually nice, where you have that kind of elevated level of thinking in terms of, it could go either way on that one. How I like to think of it, I don't like to think that 11 would just completely abandon her friends like that. I don't know. I mean, I don't get all teary-eyed, cry face, ugly face like other people in that auditorium. I could go either way on it. I like to think that that actually was the ending for her in terms of her sacrificing herself. Just, you could go either way. But if you told me it was definitive either way on it, who knows if there'll ever be any kind of confirmation on that. Who knows? But either way, I really liked that creative choice for the ending right there. And then, man, that was just beautiful. All the characters closing their books, putting on the shelf, signaling this is the end for these characters and this saga, this Vecna saga, or just Stranger Things in general. You know, this 5-part story. And then you cut to the end where you got a huge clap from the audience. So it was a great experience watching the finale. Now, I don't think the finale, if I want to be nitpicky or just give my real thoughts or be critical, I don't think it got everything perfect. Some of the creative choice with Vecna, whether it was a lack of real explanation for the backstory, the whole mind flare thing, and then especially what I talked about in terms of Agent K and her mission, or the ending to that story, the military story, man, that was so bad. Someone's got to take the Duffer Brothers, Sean Levy, whoever wrote that, which I think it was the Duffer Brothers. You got to talk to them about that one, because that was really bad there. And then just the fact that when I heard it was going to be a 2-hour episode, I was kind of the belief that, you know, I guess it was going to feel paced differently, like the actual main conflict was going to take a longer amount of time. It was over at about an hour, 10-ish minutes, and then you just had a whole bunch of wrap up, which did make the whole ending or episode in general feel weirdly paced. But I guess I really should have thought of that in terms of, you know, you have a series that's meant a lot to people, as much to people as Stranger Things has. It deserves an extended amount of time for its actual ending. Makes for some weird pacing in terms of, again, these kind of endings. It feels cartoonish when it keeps going and going and going. But it all was very touching and well earned, and made for a hell of an experience and a hell of a time following this series. So those are kind of my spoiler-free thoughts right there. Again, the experience watching it was unbelievable. Loved all of those crowd cheering moments, and it worked as a nice conclusion. That's the best thing that you can say about it, is that it legit feels like a conclusion, as in if there was anything else to like come out for these characters in the next like 5 years, it would just feel like so forced. And that's the great thing about an ending story when done right, when you do feel that sense of closure. And they better keep it that way, because I don't want this ending to feel ruined as an actual ending. Now, I don't think Stranger Things ain't ever going to be done for good. You know, it's just a license to print money between the merchandise and the cult phenom that it is. They've said that spin-offs are in the work. There's some kind of animated thing happening. You know, it's just amazing how the series appeals to just all ages. It's really just the perfect series for everyone. I just hope that, you know, whatever they do next, it's just completely separate from any of these characters, the story, just everything. Just let this be an actual ending for a good amount of time. I'm sure they'll eventually tie into these characters eventually, but hopefully not in this decade. I'll put it that way. But it's been a hell of a time watching Stranger Things, and it was a hell of a time watching this finale. So this ended up being a pretty long spoiler review, going through all the ins and outs. That's why it kind of warranted it, because this is one of those kind of mega events where there's a whole lot to talk about, and it was fun to kind of get my thoughts out there in terms of one big wrap up for the series. I do still have one more Stranger Things review style video to do, and that's going to be a ranking for all 5 seasons. I'm pretty definitive in my thoughts. It's kind of close when it comes to ranking a few of them here and there. But stay tuned for that in the not too distant future. So that'll do it for this rambling type spoiler review of Stranger Things Season 5, the finale, the whole experience. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching.